Our month-long shuttering journey has come to an end. We arrived in Anxi on the afternoon of March 20th, 1943. There was not even a hint of a broken-down old road over the duration of our journey from Anxi to Dunhuang. For the final leg of our journey to Dunhuang, we hired 10 camels. Looking behind us, we saw only sand dunes, sparse clumps of vegetation, and a dusky sky. Even the harsh rays of the sun have been swallowed up by the gray expanse of the Gobi Desert. The atmosphere was exceptionally cold and dim.
The author of these words is named Dun Huang, called by man the guardian spirit of Dun Huang. On March 24th, 1943, the second day of spring in the lunar calendar, a 6-man camel caravan arrived in Dunhuang. Gongsheng Li, Li Zanting, Chen Yanru, Liu Rongjeng, Xin Pude, and Dun Huang, sent by the Ministry of Education of the People's Government from Chongqing and Lanzhou, performed the prep work for the Dunhuang Art Institute. It took them 3 days and nights to go from Anxi to Dunhuang, nearly 120 kilometers, and it took an even longer 6 years for Dun Huang to make his journey from Paris to Dunhuang. In the 1920s and 30s, a group of young artists gathered at the arts capital of the world, Paris. They were recognized by colleagues such as Xu Beihong and Liu Haisu as pioneers of Chinese modern Western-inspired artistry. Of this group, 2 individuals formed an insoluble bond with Dun Huang. One is Wang Ziyun, a famed sculptor. Liu Kaichu, Li Keran, and Wu Guanzhong were all his disciples. The other is Dun Huang, who had graduated from the famous Lyon Art School. His works were featured many times in Parisian salons. In this mecca of the art world, this group of young Chinese artists have managed to reach the same standing as French artists by the merit of their own skills.
Of those of us who were in Paris in the 30s, only we were married and with a kid no less. As a result, every weekend, our house would become the habitual meeting place. The Chinese artists abroad and Art Institute were there. All the painters and the sculptors met at our house.
By this point, Dun Huang had lived in France for 10 years. It seemed to many that he has already become naturalized to the region.
One day, after I came out of the Louvre, as I was walking along Saint Germain Avenue, I browsed through the contents of an old bookstore near the Seine. Suddenly, I found a 6-booklet compilation titled Le Grotte de Dun Huang.
These photographs were taken in 1908 during the French explorer Paul Pelliot's expedition to the Dunhuang Mulgao caves in Gansu province. Even 30 years later, after being immersed in Western oil painting, the Chinese artist was enchanted by Dunhuang's art.
These close to 1,500-year-old drawings were of magnificent composition. Its strokes were bold and wilder than even the modern pictures of wild beasts. What an amazing discovery. I was very shocked.
He was shocked, he said. I am in France to study art. If our roots are the foundation of our art should still be in the homeland, then I will definitely return there. He wanted to investigate, find out what exactly it was. Later, he said that ever since then, he made up his mind to return, and he absolutely wanted to go to Dun Huang.
This meeting with Dunhuang's art on the banks of the Seine was almost a summons. Soon, Chang Shuhong was invited to become a teacher at the Beiping National Art School. By 1936, the atmosphere of war permeated Beiping. The Kwantung Army had already occupied Manchuria and were steadily pushing their way into the North China Plain. This obviously left little time for this 10 years Chinese expat artist to make his decision. Not 10 months after Chang Shuhong arrived in Beiping, the Marco Polo Bridge incident happened, resulting in the fall of Beiping. One after the other, its residents fled southward. Concurrently, Chang Shuhong's wife and daughter in France were on their way back to China.
We brought back the paintings my father left in Paris, and some of my mother's small sculptures. Regardless, I remember we had a bunch of crates, big and small, on the ship. When we met up with my father in Shanghai, I recall him saying, "Why did you bring back so much? We need to start fleeing now."
Beginning in 1936, in order to escape the conflict, Chang Shuhong and the Beiping National Art College first moved to Hangzhou, then Kuling in Jiangxi, then Guiyang, followed by Kunming, before finally arriving in Chongqing.
Dun Huang, which had provided the impetus for my long journey home, remained in the distant yellow sands of the northern desert, within sight but not reach. 4 years passed in an instant.
On November 20th, 1937, the Republic of China moved its wartime capital to Chongqing. Large numbers of academics flocked to the city, transforming it into the heart of the Sino-Japanese Resistance's cultural movement. While almost everywhere else in China, Chinese culture was ruined and the long-time civilization was buried in war. In the most important moment for the country, lots of weedy intellectuals went to Gansu Corridor to save the remained root of the Chinese culture. There were many names left in the history of the 1940s. In March of 1941, Zhang Daqian led a group of 9, including his wife and son, to Dunhuang. At the time, Zhang Daqian's art was considered on par with Qi by Xi, leading to the expression, Zhang in the south, Qi in the north. His talent had attracted the eyes of the nation and the world. 1 year ago, in a stroke of luck, a friend of Zhang Daqian told him that if one travels west through the Gansu Corridor, deep in the Gobi Desert, there existed a large amount of well-preserved murals dating to the Song dynasty within Dunhuang's Mogao Caves. This information led Zhang Daqian to make the long journey from Chongqing to Dunhuang. They lived at the temple directly across from the Mogao Caves. Early in the morning, every day, Zhang Daqian, accompanied by his second son, Zhang Xinzhi, entered the caves, only leaving in the evening. In the over 400 caves of Dun Huang, its more than 2,000 painted sculptures and 40,000 square meters of frescoes encompass over 1,000 years of resplendent artistic culture. The scale of the artwork was more than exceeded Zhang Daqian's imagination. He persisted, deciding to begin a large-scale, planned transcription of Dun Huang's murals. Zhang Daqian, who originally planned to stay in Dunhuang for 3 short months, rescheduled his plans and settled down for this daunting task. On October 5th, 1941, August 15th by the lunar calendar, the head of the Republic of China's control yuan, Yu Yo-ren, arrived abruptly at the Mogao Caves in order to meet with his good friend, Zhang Daqian. Daqian was immensely moved. He told Yu Yo-ren of the immense value of Dunhuang's art, yet the Mogao Caves remained unmanaged, leaving them vulnerable to damage from neglect. Yu Yo-ren immediately composed 3 poems, one of them being the following: Stein and Pelio came and went. The caves here express lament. Dunhuang is now known to all. Where among them do Chinese fall? After this reunion, Yu Yo-ren suggested that the Chinese government establish a system to preserve Dunhuang's cultural relics, thus changing Dunhuang's fate for the better. In retrospect, protecting the art and culture at Dunhuang came about due to the appeals and attention of a myriad of cultural personages. This panorama of Dunhuang's Temple of 1,000 Buddha, which was drawn in 1942 and captures the landscape of the Mogao Caves from 60 years ago over 4 meters of canvas, is the work of traveling sculptor Wang Ziyun. Like many fellow patriotic artists, Wang Ziyun returned to his homeland during the Second Sino-Japanese War. In October of 1940, Wang Ziyun founded the Northwest Art Heritage Research Group, conducting many surveys along the Gansu corridor over a period of 4 years. During near half a year's time in Dunhuang, the survey team took large amounts of comprehensive close-up photographs of the Mogao frescoes. These rarely before-seen photos of Dunhuang shook China's cultural circles once they reached Chongqing with their owners. This is the scholar Sheng Da, seen here living in a dilapidated temple in the Mogao Caves. During his early years, Sheng Da traveled throughout Europe, studying and transcribing the Dunhuang manuscripts which had been scattered throughout the continent. In 1942, he led a Chinese Northwest Archaeological Group survey to Dunhuang. Upon seeing the Mogao Caves hanging on by a thread firsthand, he immediately penned an article titled Study on the Management of Dunhuang 1,000 Buddha Caves and Other Related Issues, rallying others to the cause of preserving Dunhuang. This article quickly galvanized the cultural world, creating a high point for interest and dialogue over Dunhuang. As the interest in Dunhuang grew, the publisher of Science and Civilization in China, the Englishman Joseph Needham, visited Dunhuang, after which he asserted that the Mogao Caves were perhaps China's greatest national monument and museum. In late 1942, Yu Yo-ren suggested a bill to the Republic of China's control to establish a national Dunhuang College of Art. In January 1943, the Ministry of Education of China announced they would set up a preparation committee of National Dunhuang Institute of Art and appointed Cheng Shu-hong as the vice chairman. Cheng Shu-hong finally left for Dunhuang.
As the sun rose over the three rugged mountain peaks, all of us became entranced by the spectacular scene before us.
In 1943, the newly arrived Cheng Hong experienced all of the brilliance of the Mogao Caves, blinding him to their state of disrepair. The Mogao Caves, a unique cultural treasure, was used as a prison. In 1920, a group of white Russian soldiers retreating from the aftermath of the Russian Civil War trespassed into Chinese territory and were arrested by the local Chinese authorities. They were detained in these caves. The murals of Cave 427 bear the marks of these white Russian prisoners. The gold leaf on the murals have been scraped away, while Cyrillic graffiti is drawn below the paintings. Meanwhile, cave number 156 retains signs of smoke and fire damage. The library cave had long been emptied by 1943, having fallen prey to the predations of Western explorers. It made it hard to believe that the space was once home to 50,000 scrolls of cultural relics.
The empty silence of the dark cave feels like a quiet lamentation of her fabled glories, wordlessly expressing her hatred for her current sad state. The task laid out for me is heavy indeed.
(1944). Early morning on this day, not far to the south of the Mogao Cave's 9-storied tower, the National Dunhuang Institute of Art was formally established. The over 400 years of neglect has finally ended for Dun Huang. For the first time, it is receiving the protection of the nation and its government. The date is January 1st, 1944. A new year has dawned.
There are two ancient elms dating from the Qing dynasty growing in the courtyard. The main building is the office. The principal structure is our workroom. To the north are the offices and the storage rooms. To the south are the meeting rooms and my office. Everyone eats inside the cafeteria. There's no hard set time for work hours. Everyone's good about maintaining schedule. After eating, we immediately go into the caves, copying, investigating, each with our own tasks.
When the institute was founded, there were no more than 10 employees. Cheng Hong constantly sent letters to his friends and pupils, inviting them to join. Soon, Dong Shiwen, Zhang Lingying, Li Yu, and other young artists from China's interior trickled into Dunhuang. Many of them were Cheng Hong's old students.
The Gobi Desert seemed to go on forever, like you were sitting in a small boat in the middle of a giant sea. At the time, you couldn't say whether the Gansu corridor or China was larger.
When the cook brought you your meal, it was 4 bowls of noodles for 4 people, that's it. 1 bowl of vinegar, another of salt. You take a spoonful of vinegar and salt and mix it into your noodles and ate it like that. Life was pretty tough back then.
Not long after, Cheng Hong convinced his wife to move herself and their 2 daughters from Chongqing to Dunhuang.
The missus was always very well made up. She was a looker naturally, and also really liked to dress up.
Surveying caves, researching art history, copying frescoes. Compared to the war-torn front lines, the tranquil wastes of the Northwest became a wide-open stage for the arts. From the late Tang to the 5 dynasties, records indicated that the Mogao caves were home to some 10 temples and 200 to 300 monks. After over 4 centuries of slumber, the activity of those years must have seemed a major era in the chronicles of Mogao. More and more people started arriving in Dunhuang. There are a lot of famous people in this photograph. In April of 1943, in the midst of this frenzy of activity, Daqian finished his work at the Mogao Caves and packed up in preparation for his departure. He left a scroll of paper in Cheng Hong's care. It was a secret treasure map of local mushrooms. Pinpointed on it were locations in Dunhuang where one could find edible fungi. In those hard times, this map meant that Cheng Hong was able to greatly supplement his dull dinner selection. Daqian had planned on staying in Dunhuang for only 3 months. By the time that he left, 3 years had passed. During that time, they had copied 276 murals. Not only did they greatly influence his later art style, but once large-scale restorations of the Mogao caves began, nearly 200 of these sketches were used as references. In order to fund this survey of Dunhuang, not only did Daqian sell off large numbers of his own works and private collection of antiques and ancient art, he had also lent 5,000 taels of gold, equal to 500 bars worth in modern terms. When Daqian arrived back in Chengdu in November of 1943, friends noticed the once shiny black head of hair on his head had turned snow white by his ears.
I estimated that at least 100 of the caves were completely buried under the sands. Although conditions were very rough, everyone approached their jobs with high spirits. We hired many natives as aides, and together we constructed a 2-meter-high, 2-kilometer-long fence around the Mogao caves. We hauled sand excavated from the bottom layer of the caves a half-kilometer outside of this area into the Gobi. In addition, we had to repair the crumbled corridors and bridges, repaired the roads, and planted saplings. These tasks took us more than 10 months in total.
Autumn's arrival meant that the workers at the Institute had been in Dunhuang for over half the year by then. Conditions in the harsh environment endlessly tested them.
The pigments used for copying were also a problem. I remember we used to paint from horsepower brand, but some of the mineral pigments were locally sourced. The soil was exceptional. Sometimes we would use it as we dug it out the ground.
We drank the alkaline water from the Daqian River right from the start. We were all used to it, but when other people drank it, they couldn't handle it and immediately got incontinence. If you didn't have a strong will, you couldn't stay on.
Low on funding and poor working conditions meant that artists used to working in well-prepared environments like Changshu Hong were inevitably subjected to many problems.
My father was very sullen. Whenever he came home, he was never affectionate or caring towards my mother. More often, he would vent his frustration, argue with my mother. One small mistake and he would go off. My mother couldn't take it.
And just like that, the bonds between the two people were gradually...
One day, one of Changshu Hong's students handed him a letter. It was his wife's farewell notice. Changshu Hong immediately headed for Anxi through the night, interrogating the bus stations and inns in the city. But he didn't find any leads there. After finally receiving a lead and now exhausted and despondent, Changshu Hong raced towards Yumen.
It was only later that I learned I was rescued by oil prospectors in the Gobi Desert. I was able to regain consciousness after 3 days of intensive resuscitation.
News of the end of World War II reached Dunhuang a month later. People were jubilant, and thoughts of home ignited their passions.
It had been 8 years. Who didn't want to head home? Look, everyone wanted to go. All the researchers. Gone. Like that.
During that time, the Mogao caves fell silent. Soon, new orders reached Dunhuang. The National Department of Education ordered that, due to debt incurred during the war, every program deemed unnecessary would be cut as a cost-saving measure. The Dunhuang Art Research Institute was disbanded.
Dunhuang tonight remains silent as the grave. The only sounds are the howls of distant wolves. I have long been acclimated to this kind of night, but now the situation is reversed. Now I can't sleep. Ever since I arrived at Mogao, I have felt my life becoming intertwined with its sculptures and murals. I do not wish to leave them.
I personally sold off my family's possessions. I foisted them out to a store in the city. The shopkeeper said, "Oh man, look at how poor the Changshu Hong's become. He can't even afford a ticket out of here. Just take those nice suits and leather shoes, etc. All those nice fancy clothes that he wore in France as his ticket out of here. His fare. That's how he'll get back. There's no other way. He has nothing else to offer. It was bad."
In the winter of 1945, after 3 years of work, Changshu Hong took his 2 daughters, bade farewell to Dunhuang, and headed towards Chongqing.
Looking at his expression, you could tell he really didn't want to leave. He said, as tears flowed down his face, "You've got to take good care of these caves. I will be back in the future. I will come back to you. I'm not leaving for good." We were very moved. It was quite touching.
The victorious Chongqing government was busy and chaotic, engrossed with its efforts to move back to its pre-war location. Changshu Hong's close friends also encouraged him to make his way back into China's interior, but he was dead set on reviving the Dunhuang Art Institute. At that time, very few people were interested in the fate of Dun Huang. After nearly a year of traveling around, Changshu Hong was finally able to convince the Central Institute director, Fu Xinian, who authorized the revival of the Dunhuang Art Institute. He also gave them a truck and some supplies. In 1946, Changshu Hong led a team of newly recruited students from Central College's art department and Sichuan National Art College, students like Duan Wenjie, Hu Xiliang, Sun Ruxian, and Ouyang Lin back to Dunhuang. In the second year, more people arrived at Dunhuang, including among them a student from Chongqing National Art College named Li Chengxian. She was Changshu Hong's new wife. Over the following decades, the two stayed together through poverty and wealth until the end of their lives.
We can now enter and inspect over 200 caves. We recently made another main cave entrance. Lately, we prohibited 2 habits that were previously established as unreasonable. Number 1 is that colleagues within the Institute are under no circumstances to mimic the actions of spraying water into the cave, under penalty of immediate dismissal. Number 2 is that should anyone from outside the Institute attempt the above, their permission to survey the site will immediately be revoked. I believe that anyone who wishes to preserve these frescoes should do everything in their power to oppose actions meant to harm them.
After 1948, Dunhuang's conservation management became more and more standardized, but Dunhuang's 1,000 years of history, dilapidated with age, was only saved and restored thanks to Changshu Hong's tireless efforts to petition the governments for funding. This wish would only be fully realized after the birth of the new China. With the support of the People's Republic of China, comprehensive efforts to preserve and restore the site officially began. The southern region of the Mogao Caves was reinforced during 2 periods around 1956 and 1963. Dunhuang conservation efforts were transformed from caretaking into rescue, reinforcement, and protection. After shedding half a century of dust and sand, the precipitous cliffs and crumbling walls of Dunhuang were revitalized, but their protector had aged greatly. In 1982, in this 1987 documentary produced by Japan's NHK, an 83-year-old Chang Shu-hong made one last return to Dunhuang.
My father had believed at the time he was a guest in Beijing. He said, "My home is Dun Huang." When he was sick, he said to me, "When I die in the future, I want to return to Dun Huang." In truth, that sentence was one of his last testaments.
In 1945, Xiang Da, who had returned from Dunhuang a year previous, began his long-term assignment as curator of the Peking University Library. Xiang Da was a bibliographer and historian with many publications to his name. After Japan's surrender, he compiled a long list of wartime damage to Chinese cultural relics and called upon the government to pressure Japan for compensation. Zhang Daqian left the Chinese mainland in 1949. This Eastern artist finally cemented his place among the world's greatest masters. After studying his work throughout his lifetime, some believe that Daqian's art style underwent a drastic shift around 1945. Ink flowed more freely from his brush, exhibiting a magnificent spirit. After surveying Dunhuang's artifacts, Wang Ziyun changed his own art's direction and dedicated his life towards archaeology and the preservation of art. His status as one of the frontrunners of Chinese modern sculpting was gradually forgotten as he became a scholar. In 1990, the 90-year-old Wang Ziyun passed away sitting in his office. At the foot of Sunway Ridge, directly facing the 9-floor tower, sits a silent row of tombstones. This is the final resting place of Chang Shu-hong and many of his fellow Dunhuang Institute co-workers. The Japanese author Ikeda Oku once asked Chang Shu-hong, "If reincarnation were real, what career would you choose?" Chang Shu-hong's reply was, "I am not Buddhist. I do not believe in reincarnation. However, if I were truly given another life, I would still be Chang Shu-hong. I want to complete my unfinished work."